My friend Sally has had a bad run with neighbors, but this one was probably one of the worst. Sally lives very close to me, only about a 10-minute walk or so. We were both around 14 years old when this happened. We live rural, so we both have a lot of land. Sally and I decided to go camping on hers. We had bought some cheap hammocks and made our way through the bushland. The days prior, we had spent clearing some of the razor grass with a cane knife to make a path. We probably should have worn long pants because we ended up with lots of little cuts all over our legs and even some on our arms. Still though, we set up our hammocks and had brought quite a few blankets because it does get pretty cold at night, even though you're sweating a lot throughout the day. We were still on her property and hadn't quite gone into her neighbor's boundary. Her neighbor had just recently leased the land to new tenants. Sally and I were sitting on our hammocks, talking and laughing. This was around 9 p.m. Suddenly, we heard something in the brush. We thought it was probably just a wallaby. There's plenty of wallabies around here. But then we could see the figure of a man. We were whispering to each other, trying to see who it was. At first, I thought it was her brother. He was the kind of person who had come and scared us a lot when we were camping previously, after all. But as the person got closer, we were thinking that maybe it could have been her dad. It was really dark, and to be honest, the bush looks the same from every angle. We realized, though, that the man was coming from the other direction from her house. We didn't dare move, and covered our torches under our blankets. The man came up and said hi, and introduced himself as Ben. Now, Ben was extremely drunk. He staggered around and reeked of alcohol. He started saying what a nice little camp we had here, and said something pretty unsettling. I'll have to come out and sunbathe naked here in one of these hammocks. Sally and I gave each other worried looks, but we didn't say anything. It only got worse from there, though. I can't remember everything he said because it was a while ago, and he was mumbling on for what felt like forever. But some of the things that stuck out to me were, "I'll have to kill yous Wolf Creek style," and, "Oh, so you're nearly legal then," when he asked us about our age. Ben was probably in his 40s himself. Sally and I were texting each other while he was talking and coming up with an escape plan. He also offered us a puff on the magic dragon and pulled out a glass pipe. We declined, of course. Sally said that we were heading back to the house to make food. He told us to come back. We left our blankets and most of our stuff there, though, and we legged it as fast as we could. We told her dad everything that happened, and we slept inside that night. The next morning, when we went back to our campsite to retrieve our things, though, we came to find that everything had been burnt. A circle with probably around a 20-meter radius was all completely burnt. Coming from that circle was a line of burnt grass, going right towards the neighbor's house. I'm not a firefighter or a forensic investigator or anything, but it seemed obvious that some kind of fuel had been used. Sally and I were sitting there talking when it dawned on us the possibility that Ben may have thought we were still in the hammocks due to the pile of blankets we had left behind. Ben was extremely drunk and definitely wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. We went and told Sally's dad, who then checked it out, and then went next door. Ben's roommate answered the door and said Ben wasn't home and apologized. He even gave Sally's dad $50 for the blankets and hammocks. Nothing happened for a few more months after that. Sally told me at school at one point, though, that Ben had been caught on camera sneaking around her yard. I went to her house after school because she was going to be home alone until her dad finished work, and she was a bit scared. I ended up sleeping over there that night, and that's when he came over. Ben was drunk and stumbled out in front of Sally's house. He started yelling and accusing Sally of stealing his dog. Sally's dad called the police. They came and arrested him. The next day, we found a knife in the yard. It wasn't from Sally's house either. The police came again, and we told them about the knife. They got the footage from the cameras as well. I don't know what happened to Ben, but after that he no longer lived next to Sally. This happened around 4 months ago. I debated over whether or not I should even post it, considering for a time I wasn't sure if I was just being paranoid, considering I watch a lot of true crime. Looking back now, though, it creeps me out to think what could have happened if I hadn't acted how I did. Yeah, sure, I guess I could still be paranoid, but something in my gut says I'm not. I get to my back gate from a small path at the start of a creek, just off a main road. You can go the longer way around to get to my front door, but usually I just take the back gate because it's a lot quicker. The creek is on the left side of the path, surrounded by trees. The local council has a problem with how many bats live there. The right side of the path is the backs of houses. Some have gates like mine as well. If you follow the main road for a bit, there's an underpass that's always covered with graffiti. It always gets painted over, only for more graffiti to appear as the cycle continues. There I was, hanging out with a friend. We went on a bike ride and had a picnic before school would start back up again. It had gotten pretty dark by the time I was heading back, though. I went through the underpass, which is in itself a sketchy thing to do at night, especially considering I'm only a 16-year-old 5'4" female. I got onto the main road and started riding in the bicycle lane when I noticed all the bats in the sky. It was rather pretty, actually, but I also noticed 2 cars by the curb on either side of the road with their lights on. One of the cars was black and had tinted windows, and another was a bigger 4WD car, also black with tinted windows, that had a mattress tied to the roof. I assumed as I went past that it was somebody having a party or whatever, and kept on biking. I heard cars behind me, but that's not unusual considering it's a main road, even if it does get pretty quiet at night. They suddenly slowed down though, so they were driving right behind me, which was odd. I was guessing it was just because they didn't want to hit me. I mean, no one was on the other side of the road. I was in the bicycle lane, so they could have overtaken me if they had wanted to. I found myself biking even faster because I had a bad feeling I was the reason they were driving so slow. As I was thinking this, a car overtook me, but it didn't speed off or anything. It remained driving at my speed, just in front of me. Then I noticed there had been a car behind that car that was also driving at my speed just behind me. Needless to say, I was pretty scared being sandwiched between these 2 cars when I realized they were the same ones that had parked on the other side of the road earlier. The fact they were pretty much the exact sort of car you think of when you think of a creepy car didn't help either. I kept biking until I got to the path by the creek I usually take to get to my back gate. I was having second thoughts though. It was dark. Not many people take that path, and it was surrounded by trees. Not to mention how creeped out I felt by what was happening with these cars. I thought it would be best if I turned down the path, because the cars would probably just keep driving. But the second I thought that, the 4WD in front of me indicated to go into the curb just up in front of the path. Nope, not happening. No way was I going down that path now, considering there was no reason someone would ever pull up there. There wasn't an entrance to anyone's house nearby or anything, except the complete darkness surrounding the creek. I was going to go the long way around. I overtook the 4WD that had now pulled into the curb to continue along the bicycle lane on the long way to my house. As I overtook the 4WD, it indicated to leave the curb. They hadn't even been there 10 seconds when they pulled out as the car that was still behind me stopped to let them go. It went back to sandwiching me with the other car. Pretty much any remaining thought I had of this all being a coincidence went right out the window. I turned up a path that goes by the main road. When the cars noticed I did this, they too indicated. By this point, my heart was beating so fast, I came up with a split-second plan. I needed to turn left at the T intersection to get to my house, but I didn't want to risk these cars knowing where I lived. So I continued going straight, pretending I didn't need to turn. They continued also. When it was no longer possible for them to take a left, I did a quick turn and sped down my street. I heard both of the cars speed off at the same time as well, and I don't think I've ever biked faster in my life. I flung open the front gate, and as I closed it behind me and pulled my bike in, I heard the cars approaching my street from the left. I panicked and ducked down, peering through the gap in my fence. I had a sinking feeling I knew just what cars would come past. Sure enough, the black 4WD and the other car sped past. About 15 years ago, when I was 22-ish, my best girl and I went out to bars 3 to 4 plus times a week. Generally, we met some interesting people and made a lot of new friends. There were a few bars that we hit up more than others, and one in particular where we knew the bartender/manager very well. We went the week of Halloween, and each night their staff would dress up in a different costume. This was where we came across Ron. He was bouncing at this bar, and didn't even catch my eye in the slightest as I gave him my ID to get in. Until just a few years ago, I never really looked anyone in the face. Even now I have to force myself to do it. My girl and I hung out, drunk and danced, met some people, then headed up to the bar to chat with our friend. Out of nowhere, he asked me what I thought about Ron. I had no idea who he meant, and he gestured to the bouncer. I was indifferent. He was older looking, very muscular, turned out to be a major gym rat. I was 22-ish there, dressed in black and skulls and platforms. It didn't quite seem my type on the outside, but my bartender friend vouched for him, said he was a really cool guy. He asked if he could give Ron my number, and I figured it would be okay. I hear from him the next day and he wants to hang out. At the time, I lived with my uncle and aunt, a pastor and his wife, so he invited me to meet at his place, and we would just go have a casual hang somewhere middle of the day chill. I get there, and his apartment door is wide open. His much better looking, married, and closer to my age friend was there as well. He seemed nice enough, and I didn't feel unsafe, as they had left the door wide open, and again my bartender friend had vouched for him. He mentioned he needed to grab a few office supplies, so the three of us pile in his douchey car and head to an office supply store. We go in, and as we walk in, a pretty girl walks by. He does the head thing and just completely stares at her. The oblivious follower with his head kind of thing. We weren't together or anything, but I found it to be extremely rude. So later in the car, I mention it to him. I tell him, "Hey, look, I know we're just hanging out or whatever, but don't disrespect me like that. Everyone looks, but be less obvious. Don't make me look like an ass in public." He laughs and tells me he thinks it's hot I stood up for myself, especially on our first hangout. Okay. We get back to his place, and as we walk inside, he says, "I like that. You're gonna have a ring on your finger by December." Remember, we'd only just met on Halloween week. Anyways, his friend leaves. We get takeout and hang and drink, and just talk. Turns out he's from the same tiny town that my parents are from, which is 6 hours south of us. He's a Desert Storm veteran, which made him more than 20 years older than me. He was back in school to finish his degree, worked full-time during the week, and bounced at night and on weekends. Seemed like a decent lifestyle. He asked about my tattoos, I have a lot, and we talked about my love of horror and fascination with true crime and serial killers. He seemed very interested, but said he didn't know much about them. I told him I'd lend him my encyclopedia of serial killers, so it could be like a crash course for him. Maybe a week later, we hang out again and I bring him the book. We hang out multiple times. I even sleep there a few times. One day, we're just hanging out and drinking heavily. He says something to me that felt very much like he was getting way too comfortable too fast, like telling me to do something. I told him not to speak to me that way, and turned to walk away, when suddenly my head jerked backwards. He had grabbed my hair around the base of my neck. I grabbed his hand, and he tried to laugh it off and apologize, saying he hadn't meant to be that rough. He tried to act like it was some sort of foreplay, but I cut that shit off real quick. I wanted to leave, but I was already very buzzed, so I just sat there and he said he was going to do some work. I thought I would just let the buzz wear off, head home, and never talk to this guy again. While I'm sitting there, though, and he's working, he suddenly decides to tell me in graphic detail about his favorite serial killer in the book so far and why. I think the way he's talking about it seems a bit off, but then again, I'm just there waiting out my buzz. He starts working on a sociology assignment that's studying urban legends and stuff. Plays videos with horrible, creepy content, and it's starting to creep me out. I realized later that I felt that way because I didn't feel safe with him. I ask him to wait until I'm gone to play it out loud, or at least put on headphones. He laughs at me and tells me he can't believe I'm such a poser. You have all these tattoos and skulls and you're really scared? You look all goth or punk rock, but you're terrified. He laughed this scary laugh. He was really enjoying that this was creeping me out. I didn't want to drive even mildly buzzed, though. I told him that his reaction was really scaring me. I love scary things, but this guy was enjoying watching me squirm in a very sick way. He loved it. His face was completely serious, and he suddenly tells me he has his machete under his mattress. I look and see the handle barely sticking out. He tells me he could make me disappear, and nobody would ever find my body. In that moment, my adrenaline hit. I grabbed my bag and ran to my car. He sort of slowly lumbered behind me, laughing at me and telling me not to leave. I was stone cold sober at this point. Adrenaline, I guess. I start my car and take off about 2 minutes down the road by the mall. I just park and slow my breathing down. I call my girl and just unload. For the next week, he texts and calls me over and over, switching between begging me to give him another chance and berating me and calling me a poser and a fake. I tell our bartender friend, and he can't really believe Ron did all those things. He only works with him a few more times, and after that, they don't talk. Ron set his sights on someone new, another chick in her early 20s. Her family owns the Vietnamese restaurant in the same strip as the bar. The bartender tells us Ron had just started seeing her, and she ended up pregnant almost immediately. I asked the bartender to warn her or give her my number, but he never saw her again after that. I hope and pray she didn't get stuck with Ron, and every time I'm in that area, I pray I don't run into him again. He can keep the encyclopedia for all I care. I just hope he hasn't picked up any tips from it. My husband and I live in a very rural place. It's known as a holler where we're from. For those who don't know, a holler is a hollow or a road that runs along a creek in a valley, in between two mountains. Our nearest neighbor is about 100 yards away on one side, and through a wooded area on the other. The way our house is laid out, if you drive up our hill and park, you come up to the back door. The front door faces the road, and no one ever knocks on our front door. One night just a couple of years ago, I decided to go to bed just a little bit earlier than my husband. He wanted to stay up playing video games in the living room. I had been asleep for a couple of hours when my husband suddenly burst through the door of the bedroom, freaking out. He was mumbling and rambling in a desperate whisper. He had his phone in his hand, and I could just make out the light shining on his face. I was so out of it at first that I couldn't make sense of what he was saying. I lay there for a moment, and suddenly I hear him clearly whisper, "He's trying to break down the door." I sat bolt upright in bed, asking just what on earth he was talking about. He shushed me, telling me to whisper, and said he had to call 911. I glanced at the clock and noticed it was 3 a.m. I reached out to turn on the light when he loudly whispered, "No." He got through to 911 and told them that we needed assistance at our address. I caught a few details, but my head was still spinning. After he got off the phone with them, he told me what happened. It had been late at night, and he was staying up playing a game, when he suddenly heard heavy footsteps on the porch. He paused his game to listen in, and then there was a knock, another knock, then the repeated beating of the door. He could hear a man's voice, but he couldn't quite make out what he was saying. Instead of opening the door, he decided to walk out the back door and around to the front of the house to see who it was. He thought that it was possibly our older neighbor needing some help with his wife. So there he goes and walks out the back door, walks around to the front, only to see a large man dressed all in black, carrying a duffel bag. At this point, the man was pounding on the door so hard, it looked like he was trying to break in. My husband waited for a moment, then asked the man if he needed help or something. Apparently, the man didn't realize that my husband was just behind him, because he started yelling through the door, "Just let me in and I won't hurt you." At this point, my husband decided no more questions were necessary. He ran back into the house, locked the door, turned out the lights in the kitchen, and burst into the bedroom to call 911 and wake me up. After he called 911, we waited huddled in the darkness for 40 minutes for a policeman to show up at our house. 40 minutes! His excuse? Small town. No one was on duty. He had just been asleep. It was 3 a.m. after all. The policeman didn't even get out of his car either. He just sat there and spotlighted the house from our driveway as my husband went outside and told him the story and described what he could of the man. The cop left. My husband comes back in, and we sit in the darkness of our bedroom, terrified until daybreak, wondering just who that man was and what he was going to do to us if he actually did break in.